So what do we want to talk about?
Go ahead and wait for the microphones if you would.
I wanted to ask you, Luana Simon came out talking about not really wanting the 18 playoff, that she wasn't a huge fan on the floor. I wonder where you stand on this and your impression of, after year one of this and the tenor of it, where you think it's headed.
Well, I think a lot of thought among ADs and presidents need to go into what we want college football to look like in the future. I think there are many different variables that come into play. One is from the student-athlete perspective. One is from the institutional perspective. Another is from the public and media perspective. And I think, it's probably not great for anyone to talk in December about what football postseason should look like, because everyone's coming off either a positive or a negative experience relative to the postseason. I do feel, there's a lot of great football teams out there in the country right now that feel like they've had a failed season or a down season, and that's because they're not part of the 14 playoff. I'm not sure if the solution is to expand the field or to reduce the field. I do know that institutions had great experiences with bowl games in the past, but at the same time, I think we need to look at, how is the process working? It's 1 year. I think it's probably a little bit too early to throw judgment on the process, but I do think we need to all understand what happened this year a little bit better, especially in that selection process. But no matter how you do it, we said this beforehand, when you have two teams in a championship game, you're going to have one, maybe two teams that are a little bit upset. When you have four, you're going to have 3 to 6 that are upset. And I think that exponentially will go out into the future. So, I'm comfortable where we're at right now, but I'm also going to watch the temperature of not only Michigan State but other institutions and what the conclusion of those seasons look like. And we have to be very cautious as schools that we're not being reactionary in the employment process, in the value of a team based upon making or not making the playoff. And I think that's going to be a tough challenge for everyone. And again, you have to go through the public perception, student-athlete perception, the institutional perception, and each one of those are going to conflict in that process. So that's a good way of saying I'm not sure. I'm not going to vote tomorrow one way or the other, but I am concerned about teams like Michigan State finishing the year 10-2 and some thinking it's a failed season. It's not.
Mark, there's the law of unintended consequences. With 8 years of bowls, your fans are getting smarter now. And so as people talk about unsold tickets, I've heard from a lot of fans that said, bowls give the teams some of the worst seats. Mm-hmm. So we're going to the secondary market. How much do you as schools have to go back to the bowls now and say, listen, we're willing to take allotments, but when our people are going to the secondary markets or you and getting better seats, they're costing you money. How much do you have to go back as schools and push for a reevaluation there?
We had that conversation as recently as this week with Commissioner Delaney, and I think the savvy process that fans can go by is created by technology that's in the marketplace today. And people buy tickets different on campus. They buy tickets different in bowl games, and yet the allocation process hasn't matured with the technology. And in some ways, we need to figure out, and it can't just be, if you look at the ticketing formulas within the Big Ten Conference, it's antiquated where you don't have a lot of flexibility as an institution to take your allotment and put it out onto the third-party market as well, where you could generate people in the stands for some revenue, perhaps not at the full ticket price of the bowl game, yet you would be hurt within the structure of how we go about aggregating unsold tickets within the league. So I think within the league we need to get a little bit wiser and savvier in how we process tickets for this year as 10 bowl games. I think we need to have, and the Bulls have already stepped forward a little bit on location, but not on numbers. But right now the tickets that we have remaining are in the upper hither's of Cowboy Stadium, and fans can find seats at lower price and much better locations than what they can find with some of the remaining tickets that we have available to us. not a good business model for the participating schools. Again, it's going to take conference offices, the member institutions, the bowls, and then working with the other schools that you're competing against to build a better, wiser, smarter, and more savvy formula on how to get as many tickets as possible into the hands of fans that desire them. We're not getting credit for the many Spartans that are buying tickets through the third party. Paul Shager is, phenomenal at watching what is the going rate for tickets for each of the bowl games, how many are available, and so we know what's out there in the marketplace. We know they're going for under $10 in the Orange Bowl right now, and those are data points that we have to use in order to not let our predecessors' policies dictate how we do tickets in the future.
Mark, you kind of just touched on this a little bit about the tickets and everything, but can you just talk about the challenges you guys face as opposed to last year when you had the Rose Bowl? And I'm sure it was pretty easy to get people out there for it, but just some of the challenges you guys face, getting people down to Dallas and the Cotton Bowl as opposed to the Rose Bowl, and maybe even Miami, which I'm sure a lot of people thought you guys were headed to this year.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just in the being unfamiliar with what the Cotton Bowl is all about. The Cotton Bowl, to the Big 12 conference, is their Rose Bowl. It's what they strive to play in. It's the ultimate game. It's arguably one of the best bowl experiences there are. And that's a point that needs to be delivered, is every athletic director from Joe Castiglione all the way through have indicated that is one of the greatest experiences for fans and for student athletes to participate in. Yet here we are, we lost to Ohio State, took us out of whatever contention for a Big Ten championship or hopes for a national title, and when that happens, and when the formula would lead fans and others to believe that based upon where you are, the second to last poll, you're headed to Miami, and you don't. The one thing, and I do think this is true. I actually said Atari in the meeting, but it's like asking for the gift of gifts that you want. I want an iPad, and instead you're delivered an Xbox. And it's a great gift, but it's not the gift that you asked for, so you have to get used to, this is what I'm going to enjoy over the next 12 months until the next holiday season. The Cotton Bowl is an unbelievable bowl game. The loss to Ohio State had an impact. That's part of college football. But right now you're sitting here as Michigan State, having the string of bowl games, getting a little bit, complacent, and it's natural and easy to do. It's something that we have to fight against when you work here. But to go 10-2, to go to a city that has a lot of hotel rooms, it's relatively economical. I'm very appreciative of the fans that we have that are signed up right now. I think as an AD, you always hope to have more. I think I'm very grounded in understanding many of the variables and reasons why. I think people from Michigan like to vacation in Florida during this time of the year, or when they're retired, spend most of their time down there. That creates an existing ticket base in Florida that doesn't necessarily exist in Texas, yet there are great Spartans that work there as well. So we've accumulated those. We're doing the best that we can in reaching out, and I'm not frustrated by any means. I think our numbers are right there with what other Big Ten teams would be doing in this exact same situation. We always talk about perfect storm around here in different scenarios, and from a bowl activity, we are kind of in a perfect storm and in somewhat of a negative way, but I'm always looking at what the positive is, and I think it's going to be a heck of an experience.
Outside of identifying some of these issues, particularly with the fan base, with the perception that the fan base may be complacent with a team that's gone to bowl games, I guess 8 years in a row, what are some of your strategies, to deal with that moving forward and to maintain, the interest that Michigan State and momentum that Coach D'Antonio's built?
I don't think our fan base is complacent about our program. I think our fan base and fan bases around the country are experiencing college football and I would argue college basketball in a different way. So I think the passion and the excitement about Spartan football is very high, yet what do we need to do at home? We need to make our stadium and our practices a little bit more palatable to attending events. People are now making choices between sitting in their living room or going to a restaurant and watching the game on television in high def versus the experience of driving to Michigan State and having to deal with some of the challenges that we put forward to them, but also some of the challenges that their fellow fans put forward to them. And I think all of us need to look at how do we behave, how easy is it to get into the stadium, how much drinking is going on, is it a party or is it a football game? And I'm not in a position to say, we want to do what some schools have done and eliminate tailgating as it's known to many fans, but I am concerned from a safety and then from an enjoyment standpoint of, are we marketing to the wrong fan? I think we have a lot of folks that are walking away from Spartan Stadium because of what they're seeing in the stands, what they're seeing en route from their car to the stadium. And that's kind of a call to action to all of us. This is our backyard. This is where we choose to celebrate. Is part of that celebration some of those behaviors? Now, along with that, I think we, as an institution, need to continue what we're doing to the stadium and wrapping around and making it a stadium that is accessible, is enjoyable, where you have a little bit more comfort getting to your seats. You have a little bit more space where you sit. And I think those are all things that we've targeted, but we need to get a funding model that's effective and in play and get this thing rolling. It's, restroom lines. The number of, the Porta-Johns is Greg's favorite topic, but the number of Porta-Johns on this campus has done nothing but gone up. And yet the need for them has exponentially passed by the supply of Porta-Johns. Well, the need is because we're doing different things at football games than we used to do. And, we can react to that and keep adding and have more of those light blue Porta-Johns all over this campus, or we could do some other things on campus that would look much better, be much more accepting to those that need to use restrooms. Here I'm talking about John's, but it is part of the system. It's part of the complex process of attending games and making them more enjoyable. And, we understand, and yet anytime you come out and say stop drinking at football games, it sounds like, we're trying to deliver a bad message, and we're not. We're saying come to this campus, have a wonderful time, keep it within the environment that is acceptable for an 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, and I think everybody could have a lot better time. We'd have more seats in the stands. From the perspective of the games, it's the same thing. What's the difference between me going on vacation and watching it from northern Michigan in my cottage or down in an island on TV versus going to Dallas or going to Pasadena or wherever that game might happen to be and going to that bowl game? And those are all decisions that are relatively new to us because of the impact of television and what it looks like on TV. Long answer. Man, a long answer, sorry.
Mark, to follow up on that real quick, there's about 24 universities now that sell beer inside their stadium on campus, and they've sold it as we can make more money, it'll curb some of the tailgating outside, and we can control it in-house. Is that something you guys have considered at all? And then also, to follow up on something you said earlier, have you reconsidered upstairs student seating? And you talked about in the past maybe trying to sell those seats instead of letting them sit there empty when students don't attend?
Yeah, it's first of all, on the alcohol, it is not something that we have considered at Michigan State. I think there are a number of issues relative to liability and behaviors that would make that too big of a challenge for this environment. I would argue that I've seen some very successful and I've seen some very unsuccessful that have done that. When I was in Colorado, it was in play out there at 2 institutions that I was very close to, and frankly, I saw the good and the bad of that. I don't think you always make decisions for revenue streams. I think that has to be weighed with every other issue that you're trying to represent. So no, it's not something that I've been pushing to the president for football at all. And I'm getting old. What was the other question? Oh, the students. Yeah. No, I think, from our student perspective, we've met with a few groups, kind of sat down, I kind of pulled in 25 of the people that didn't like me and 25 that did like me, and put them all in a room, and we had a great conversation. And the result is giving to the students the environment that they most want to sit in, yet there really isn't an agreement on what that is. I think the upper deck phenomenon is one that is really strong coming from the students, that is not a desirable place to sit because you're not with your people. And, you know, if anything changes, that likely will be the one, is how can we provide students with the same number of seats in a contiguous seating area. So that would be my desire, to deliver that back to the students, along with a few other processes, going from the entry point, going to things that we can do for them throughout the game. But I don't want to reduce student seats, but I want to try to get them all in the same location.
You mentioned earlier in your press conference about not sure if you'd vote to contract or make the playoff bigger or whatever, but my comment is the long unintended consequences again. The genie's out of the bag now. You're never going to go back to what it was. So at what point, looking forward, does Mark Hollis personally say, okay, you know what, 4's too small, 8 may be too big? When do you, because you can't go back, so what is it, or is it let's just go really slow because we'll never give ground back?
Yeah, I gave you those three things, and I think it's definitely not in the first year of a four-year playoff. So it's not going to be before we have a chance to step back and look at the fallout from this year. But the three components I gave you, I would go in that order. You know, what do student athletes want? Not, I said that very carefully. What do student athletes want? Second, I would go, what is in the best interest of the institutions? Not necessarily the conferences, but the institutions. And third, I would say, what is good for the fan base? And kind of go through each one of those components. You know, I'm torn right now. I'm torn because of how a lot of teams feel across the country, and that's student athletes. You know, I've been criticized for it, but I talk to student athletes at a lot of campuses across this country, and I try to learn as much as I can from those interactions. And it's always remarkable that they very rarely give you the answer that you perceive is going to be the answer coming from the kids, and I think that's why it's so valuable to ask those questions. So the ones you're asking me, you know, I might ask a senior and ask their perspective. Likely they'll say, you know, I haven't given that much thought, or I don't really know. I just play where they line us up to play. But that's an important component for me. Do you want to play 12 games, 13 games, 14, 16? You know, how many is too many? Do you want to play 2 in December and 2 in January and have a 4-week process? Those are all good questions, and yet I still think it's a little bit premature to step away from this 4-team process. But ask TCU, ask Baylor, you know, ask a few others what they think right now. But if they're in, there'll be a bunch more. So thanks so much. Appreciate it. Louis kicking me out.